Thank you, Rich. Hello and welcome to Talk About My Generation. I'm Herbert Ricardo, and Alicia is on assignment. But today I've got my great friend Rich Grego, and we talk on a regular basis. But it's great to have him here on the podcast, and we're going to talk about some really neat stuff. We're gonna twist our brains into a bit of a pretzel today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about a philosophical journey into the meaning of life. And if that's not enough to get you to, hit delete right now, hopefully not. The idea behind it is we've had this conversation before, Rich and I, and the whole idea is what's really the meaning of life? Is it just kind of being born, getting educated, getting a job, working, maybe having kids, and then dying, or is there more to life than that? Is what goes on in our minds and our brains that throughout our whole lifespan that we're thinking about other things, and are other things as meaningful or more meaningful? And so there's no other person who I'd rather have this conversation with than my good friend and philosophy professor, Rich Grego. So, Rich, thanks for being here. And gosh,
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's a pretty depressing topic, Herb. Thanks for inviting me for this conversation. I appreciate it. But it's an important one. It's the root, right? It's the foundation of everything we do. And I
Yeah.
think you can't escape it, right? I mean, even if you don't want to think about it, ultimately, right? It's what's in the back of your mind when you're making all your life decisions. So
Yeah, we live in what, and when I think about this, it seems like we live in a linear world. It
mm,
seems like almost every society. I mean, obviously, there's certainly countries and cultures that don't think the way that we do, right? But it's basically, if you take Western thought, that a lot of it is okay. My idea is I've got to have a job. I've got to, have a partner. I've got to do well, support myself, support my family, and I'm on this kind of treadmill, right? This ever, and everybody else is on it too, right? But the thing is uh, people do it differently, right? And but
yeah,
but 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 they seem to almost follow the same. You're almost trying to follow the same path. Everyone wants to make more money. Everybody wants to be happy, and so we believe that following this path of getting educated, getting the job, getting a great job, making more money, acquiring more things, that's that path to happiness, right? And this is what we
yeah.
aspire to do.
Yeah. And I think your comment about it being sort of located particularly in our culture, I think says a lot as well, because there's and many philosophers and sociologists and psychologists, right, and whole intellectual traditions have noted this, particularly since the advent, right, of the what we call the modern era, right, that we tend in the West, in the modern post-industrial West, commercial society, secular society West, to look at life in a linear way, to look at things in a linear way. We like linear systems because they're organized and they're rational. That's how we conduct, that's how we run assembly lines and McDonald's drive-throughs and everything else. And I think, again, since we're acclimated to that kind of a culture, I think, again, it's really convenient for people to fit themselves, their lives into that sort of linear framework and think, okay, so first I'm a student, and then I, make it through college, and then I make it to my first job, and then I work my way up the corporate ladder and make middle management, and then, and I retire and die. And that's the meaning of life. So I mean, I think, whereas again, as you said, in other cultures, even in our culture, right, 200 years ago, if you lived on a farm, the cycle of life was really a cycle, right? More than a linear progression. I don't know if
Right.
that was better, but it certainly made for a different outlook on things, didn't it? And different values than we had.
Yeah, yeah. This is an excellent point that we mimic in the workplace what we
Yeah,
do
isn't it?
in our lives.
Yeah,
So we want to be productive in the workplace,
yeah,
and we want to be productive in our lives. And productive in our lives is when we go to school, did you make your A's? Did you make your B's? Right?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
you can't get a D or an F. You can't
yeah,
fail. Failure
mhm,
is bad.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
so you have to meet these
mhm,
objectives. And
yeah,
I think a philosophical thought is that it's not meeting an objective so much as trying to understand a bigger idea.
yeah,
And why aren't we in the school system, in the workplace,
yeah,
trying to think of a bigger idea? And there are some individuals who have thought of bigger ideas, right? And these tend to be
yeah,
famous people
mhm,
who either invent, big things or great things or things
yeah,
that change the world,
yeah,
or maybe in a social environment, in an art environment,
yeah,
right? Is that
yeah,
so?
absolutely.
And we almost kind
Yeah.
of want some of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the, and again, you go to look at philosophers and sociologists and psychologists from Marx, Karl Marx, right, whose critique of, capitalist, secular, industrial societies to people in what's called the Frankfurt School. There are a bunch of philosophers and psychologists who and sociologists who critiqued the modern way of life, and their notion was not so much that we want the work that we've shaped the workplace to suit our lifestyle, but again, we live in such a commercial material culture now that it's the workplace that has come to shape people's lives and the way they think about themselves. So that we start thinking about our lives the way we think about commodities on a factories aren't factory assembly lines are less common now, but we have our own information chains and industry that are the same. And one great, again, I direct anybody who was watching this maybe to note as a book by Eric Fromm, famous book. He wrote many famous books, but he wrote I'm sure you're familiar with him, Herb. He wrote a very particularly famous essay that I find compelling called "The Marketing Orientation." And what that critiqued or what that pointed out was how in this society we've become so acclimated to thinking of everything in consumerist terms, commercial terms, that people have started thinking about themselves as commodities. And they're right, that creeps into our language, right? You hear people say, I'm unattached now. Women or men will say, I'm on the market now, meaning I'm looking for somebody that I have these transactional romantic relationships with that I can hopefully, find as a good consumer item, and maybe they'll find me that way so we can select each other.
Sure.
It's just interesting, right? And
Um,
I'm sure the workplace, obviously, is where that comes from.
you know what? It's really interesting
Yeah,
you say that. And so, in a more modern way, we say, "What's your brand?
yeah,
You
yeah,
are your
yeah,
brand." I
yep,
mean,
yeah,
I mean that that came out about 10, 15 years ago, and
yeah,
of course, we the
yeah,
term of that. I mean, we've recognized that, right? But that's
yeah,
exactly it. You're
yeah,
branding yourself.
yeah,
Now you are a brand, just like Nike. And
yeah,
so it's yeah, it's really interesting that. You're right. Years ago, obviously, and we're talking about 50 plus or more a
yeah,
century ago. The family and school and church were the greatest
right,
influences in our life, and
right,
we know now from such an early age of a 3-year old,
yeah,
and it's consumerism. It's going
yeah,
shopping with mom and dad.
yeah,
It's getting the cereal, picking the cereal
yeah,
that you want,
yeah,
having a flat screen in front of you, whether it's an
right,
iPad or whatever it happens to be,
yeah,
and in front of you, and while you're watching cartoons, the commercials come out, and
yeah,
you're and that is shaping
Yeah.
truly who we are. So
Yeah.
we're even becoming even more linear
Mhm.
than we would have been 50, 100 years ago.
Sure. And that also fosters um, sort of mentality. And if you look at the way we educate people, you and I are professional educators, so we certainly have encountered this, and we've talked about this and critiqued it ourselves. But there's again a long literature in all these disciplines that address the notion of life being sort of what is that? I think what sociologists talked about, or social psychologists, primary rewards versus secondary rewards, and or primary experiences versus secondary experiences. And what they meant by that is a primary experience is one that you have in your life that you do for its own sake because you love to do it. You just like being there, so to speak. Whereas a secondary experience is an experience you have as a means to an end in order to get something you want or get to some other experience. And we have, again, living in the kind of society we do, the amount of time that people spend on secondary experiences in their lives versus primary experiences becomes so enormous that the secondary experiences so often, maybe completely, squeeze out primary experiences, so that we live in this state of mind where we are literally always having an experience not for its own sake. And think about the amount of time that all the experiences you have during a typical work day and even after work, right? So you go to work and all those experiences are sort of secondary experiences, right? I'm writing this report so I can get it in on time. I'm getting through the day so I can get to the next day so I can finally get to the weekend. I'm getting through work so I can finally go home and put my feet up. But then when I get home, right, I got a million chores to do, so I'm doing the laundry so I can get to the TV eventually. And then so that our lives are so consumed by literally always living everything we do as a means to an end that we have. It's no wonder, right, why so many people, and the empirical data is out on that, right? So many people report in studies, in psychological studies, feeling alienated and feeling alone and feeling stressed out and feeling like they're not connected to anything that's really important in their lives. And how would it not be that way, right? If that's the state of mind we're constantly in and that we're trained to be.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah,
that's my sermon for the
you
day.
know, and it reminds me, about the mind that's always traveling, and that is, when you're at work, you're thinking about the things that you have to do at home, and
Yeah,
all, and you're
right.
thinking about, your
Yeah,
kids, you're thinking about what you have to get, what are you going to cook for dinner, and
yeah,
and you're thinking about all that kind of stuff, and then when you're home,
yeah,
your mind goes, oh, I've got to get that done tomorrow. I've got to. So
yeah,
so what's
yeah,
happening is you're always traveling. Your mind is never, or I mean, I shouldn't say it's never. Of course it is. When we're at work, we're focusing on what we're doing, and we're at home, we're focusing. But I
yeah,
think a lot of times we're our mind, because we have to accomplish, I think that's what it is. We have to
yeah.
accomplish so much that
Right.
we're constantly thinking about what the next thing we need to accomplish versus, as you mentioned, being in
Yeah,
the space of now.
yeah.
And there's a million books written
Mhm.
on, think of the moment.
Yeah, right.
We think happiness will be when I get the pool
Yeah,
put in.
yeah,
Happiness is going to be when I have the children.
yeah,
Happiness is going to be, and then fill in the blank. And
right.
that can be at work, that can be at home, that can be in
Yeah,
any environment. And
yeah,
yet, is happiness not where you are today?
right.
And satisfaction, is it not where you are today, this moment? Uh, Again, one of the things, when you and I have talked about kind of doing this and us being here, I mean, right now, which is great. I'm having this great
Mhm.
feeling that I don't want
Yeah,
to be any other place. I want to be
yeah,
in the moment. I want to be in this conversation. I'm enjoying this. And
right.
how many times, as you say, during the day, are we in that moment that whatever you're doing
Yeah,
is you're doing exactly what you want to do?
yeah. And it's a telling thing to stop for anybody. And I challenge anybody to do that. Sit sometime and think about that. Think about life and your life right now, because most people don't bother doing this in terms of how many. And again, I wish I knew where these expressions came from. I just don't remember the source, but primary experiences versus secondary experiences. It can be a really sobering exercise. And I guess, maybe that's why, well, something like Buddhism and what people are calling mindfulness, that I guess derives, it's a westernized version of, Buddhist practice, which is focused right on, you hear a lot of corporate people in your sector, right? Organizational behavior pushing mindfulness now among workers and things like that. And that's what that's all about, right? It's all about people finding a way to take a breath and just be where they are and be at peace there. Which again is not something, I mean, you can find a lot of places to blame it on, but whether it's our institution, education, or whether it's work, there sure is a great incentive to push people to think linearly and live linearly and live in a secondary experience mindset, because that keeps the assembly line moving, right? It keeps them, and it keeps people doing things the way they're supposed to be doing and following the program. So that's one thing I think. I don't know if this is supposed to be a social critique or not, but I think it's one thing I think for people who want to just personally take control of their own lives, it's something to really to pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, when I think about, and certainly in the business environment, we want people to behave a certain way. I mean, we want them to dress a certain way.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I'm at fault for that because I will tell my students, don't come into my class looking like that or
It's the
whatever.
world they got to fit
And
into, though, right?
that's exactly
Yeah.
it. And it's a rule. I mean,
Yeah.
my discipline is rule generated. Businesses
Yeah.
behave a certain way. Wall Street
Yeah.
behaves a certain way.
Yeah.
But we also recognize that a lot of these entrepreneurs in life, if you take Richard Branson, I remember the
Yeah.
classic one where he didn't know the
Yeah.
difference between a million and a billion, and he didn't even
Yeah.
care about it. All he cared
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
high risk things to do, jumping
Yeah.
out of planes,
Yeah.
driving cars fast,
Yeah.
whatever it was. That's where his mind was. But
Yeah.
also because he thought away from this, he also thought big. He
Yeah.
said, why can't I design my own Coca-Cola? Why can't I design my own plane? Why can't I design my own, and then fill in the blank there, right? So the idea is, I wonder if by thinking this way that society always wants us to behave, um, does that can that hinder um, a level of awareness that we're actually that we're seeking? I wonder if we are seeking a greater way of thinking. If I don't know, I mean,
What do you
do you
think?
think that's human to think that way?
Yeah, I guess, one thing in terms of, looking at the Richard Bransons of the world, I always get a little cynical, when the people, you'll see them on the walls of people's cubicles, right? And Richard Branson hang gliding, and it's talking about break outside the box, think outside the box, be your own person, and they're sitting in cubicles, right?
Right,
On an assembly line, and it's kind of easy, right? Richard Branson can. Bill Gates can tell people, yeah, think outside the box, be a rebel, but try to do that when you're working at McDonald's on the
right,
assembly line. And again, I get that's the critique that so many of these social critics have leveled against the kind of world we live in. And America is sort of rife with that, culturally speaking, I think. On the other hand, in America, we have these great romantic notions about what an individual can do and how free we should all be and how we should always be actively imaginative and realizing our personal dreams. It's just part of the American character. And yet we have created this world in which the people who get to that point where they can afford to do it would like to think they want everybody else to be that way. But Richard, the guy who's the
right,
head of
right,
McDonald's, who owns McDonald's, he doesn't want people discovering themselves on the checkout line, on the food drive-through window or anything like that.
right.
So
Yeah,
I think there's a tension there, right? I mean, you would know
yeah.
better. This is your area of expertise. It seems to me there is.
Well, and again, so at one end of the spectrum, that's right. The person has to do their job and they have to
Yeah,
do it in a certain way, right?
yeah,
And then what we're doing is we're coming up with all these books on, think for yourself, do what you
yeah,
love,
yeah,
and all that
yeah,
kind of stuff. And but yet you have to earn a living and
yeah,
everything else. The question though is, and I think this is where that middle ground is
yeah,
while you're flipping burgers, while
mm,
you're working the checkout line, while you're
yeah,
in your office, can you think critically? Can you
yeah,
think, okay, how can I do this better? Can I take it to my boss? And you're absolutely right.
mm,
The boss might, you might have a boss that say, stop talking to me, stop giving me these ideas, keep doing
mm,
what you're doing.
yeah,
There's no doubt. But then there's some people who kind of break away out of that and do come up with their ideas. But I hear exactly what you're saying, and it's true. I mean, we just constantly pepper people with this idea that you'll be happier when you're doing what you think, or
yeah,
doing something else, or doing something different,
yeah,
and you don't know what that is, and there's high risk in that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and so, kind of going back to it is how do we, uh, I guess what I don't want to do is I don't want to take the mind away from focusing on what we must do. I don't want to take the mind away
mhm,
from the fact that we have to earn a living, that we have to support ourselves, that we have to support our family, the fact that we've got to be good employees in the workplace, and we have to be a good employer to our
yeah,
employees. I don't want to take that away, but I wonder if what's the and kind of in the what's the meaning of life. uh
mm, yeah,
can we live in that space
mm,
as well,
mm,
simultaneously
yeah,
to living in our linear
yeah,
constant loop of
yeah.
what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Um, God, there have been plenty of people with answers to that, and maybe the mindfulness idea that, comes from Buddhism is a good example, right? Because that's all about learning to, no matter what you're doing, right? These Zen Buddhists have cultivated things like tea ceremonies, right? Pouring tea and serving it, right? Archery, sitting there, pulling a bow and arrow, watching the arrow release, and things like that, into modes of sacredness in life, right? That they literally, if you really pay attention to it and learn to dwell in your experience, it becomes what was a secondary experience becomes a primary experience, I guess. Since we're using those concepts, and how to cultivate that. I mean, everybody isn't going to wind up being a Zen monk, but I do think taking time for and this, this is your area, right? I mean, you've read a million people, very constructive ones with great ideas for how to cultivate a peaceful, happy, contented mindset in a society that otherwise is linear and secondary experience related. But I would say, some of the great ones are cultivating gratitude, reminding yourself of how lucky you are, fortunate you are every day. Not in a servile, silly way, but in a genuine spiritual way. Things like literally cultivating mindfulness, learning to meditate. You can meditate in the midst of a busy day if you cultivate that kind of skill, and anybody can do it. I mean, I guess maybe those are some of the best ways to strategies to use to cope with that sort of aspect of the human condition at work, because doing that enables you to see wonder and originality and creativity in experiences that, if you're just in this, let me get through this boring day I have so I can escape. If you can transcend that, you'll find that, this sanctity and sacredness and wonder and magic and joy and love are not found in at the top of a mountain somewhere, right? Escaping from everything. They're found in the everyday in the moments of everyday life that you genuinely appreciate it and see it in enough depth that you can appreciate the the sacredness of the world around you. I mean, I guess I don't know. That's my two-bit philosophical
Yeah.
response.
And I remember many years ago, and again, I can't remember where I learned this, but I know a lot of us were talking about it, and through some reading, and that is, take 10 or 15 minutes a day and literally do nothing and
Mhm.
just think.
Mhm.
Just think, and it doesn't matter what the mind has in it and where your thoughts go. Clearly, try to create a sense of peace, try to create a sense of gratitude in it. Try to be inquisitive and in that thought.
Yeah.
Now move to today,
Mm.
and you've got that 10 minutes. What do? We go straight for that phone,
Yeah.
right?
That's what I was
And
thinking.
and
Yeah.
and and we've got that 10 minutes, and we're like, oh my gosh, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're gonna scroll through, we're
Yeah.
gonna watch videos, we're gonna read something quick, we're gonna send text messages,
Yeah.
we're gonna wait for those text messages to come back. Uh, right? And so 10 minutes now becomes a long time
Yeah.
in our thought process. And I think that's kind of pulling us away. So now we're thinking that, okay, I've got some downtime. I'm going to go to my level of technology.
Mm.
And I think that again, that's pulling you away from that. That's pulling you
Absolutely.
away from
Yeah.
thinking time and exploring time, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And those technologies are just designed to do just that, right? Aren't they? And again, to get back to the empirical data, right? I'm sure you're more familiar with it than I am, but there are reams, right, of studies that link quantity of time, proportion of time you spend on those kinds of technologies and rates of depression and just sadness and loneliness and being taught fatigue and things like that, stress. So
Right, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, we're going into more and more, there's a lot of evidence about this kind of overarching sadness and depression,
yeah,
uh, um, because I think a lot of it is through technology. I have to be careful, though. I have to be careful. I am reading a lot about that, the relationship between happiness and technology. I bring this into my classes.
yeah,
I'll be doing a talk, in September, truly about this,
yeah,
and I have to be careful. I have to be careful. I'm not this old guy who
yeah,
says,
yeah. Right,
technology is bad, get off of
right,
it. Or, I
right.
use it all the time.
Yeah,
I use it
sure.
in my classroom. I use it with my friends, and I, do the texting and when
Yep.
I've got that extra time too.
Yeah,
And I have to be careful, and I have to be mindful of making sure that when I've got that amount of time,
yeah,
that because I do believe that it is valuable. I do believe that thinking about the decisions that I've made, not always the long term, but decisions that I made today, yesterday, the day before, a week ago,
yeah,
were those good decisions?
yeah,
Am I truly happy? Am I content? And again, I almost think that I'm fortunate enough that I think this way. And I think this way because I studied this. I studied psychology, I studied motivation and drive, and
yeah,
I studied self-awareness. But again, studied it all in an environment that I've also projected
mhm,
um, productivity.
yeah,
So I,
yeah,
I even I even find that I need to be productive
Mhm.
with my
Yeah,
thinking, with my
yeah,
critical thinking.
sure. Yep.
And I almost don't
Yeah.
even want that. I
Yeah.
mean, in a
Yeah.
way I do, but
Yeah.
there's another side to me that I just want to, just think crazy.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And of course I fear that. I'm going to take, let me just mention one thing because I shared all of this with you, and we talked a little bit about playing with contrast.
Yeah.
And the modern view, right? The modern view is life is a ladder. The
Mm,
philosophical view is life is a mystery.
mm,
The modern view is you are what you do. The philosophical view is you are what you think.
mm,
A modern view is purpose equals paycheck. The philosophical view is purpose equals virtue or meaning. Okay, so
mm.
what am I doing? What's the meaning of what I do? Productivity equals worth in the modern view. Stillness and insight is that level of productivity and worth in the philosophical view. And then, of course, the modern view is accumulation. And
Mm.
then the philosophical view is letting go. And we
Yeah.
even talk about that, about stuff. If you have too much stuff, you even say that. We even
Mm.
talk about the fact that I've got too much stuff. I've got to get rid of some stuff. And yet, what have
Yeah.
we been doing? It's the accumulation of stuff.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting too. There's this sort of paradox they talk about I don't know why I keep referring to Buddhism there, but I sort of addresses so many of the things at a base level that you're raising, and there's this notion in Buddhism that that your mind is naturally generates this crazy circular paradox where once you realize you have this what you call, I guess, a productive mind, right? You're always trying to, in a linear way, trying to projecting goals and then reaching those goals and then going on to other goals and the sort of linear progression, and the idea behind Buddhism is to get off that, to transcend that rat, what we call a rat race, rightly so, right, in our culture. And you can turn that into a rat race. That you can turn the quest to transcend a rat race. And I think probably people like you and I, maybe even more, because you really are a productive, very productive person. And you've always got projects going and stuff like that. I'm not saying you're more susceptible to this than I am, but this notion in Buddhism that desire, as they see it, just desiring things is the root of unhappiness. And of course, it's a good point to consider and really reflect on, because we live in a culture that is steeped in that, right? That is, no matter what you do in our culture, the idea is, right, you should be driven by your desires. And some are good, some are bad, but ultimately that's what life is all about, and that's what's going to make you happy: desiring the right things, knowing what you want and getting it right. That's what you hear that all the time, right? And Buddhism says no. I mean, it's desiring anything in the first place. That's the cause of your problems, because if you think about it, desire, wanting things, even good things, is a state of discontent, right? Because you're saying, here I am now, but I want to be here. And that's your desire. And what that is unhappiness. It's unhappiness with where you are now. And right away, you're putting yourself into that category of secondary. Right now is a secondary experience, because I won't be happy until I get such and such a thing. Again, we live in a culture that, despite the fact, right, we also preach happiness and in appreciating the moment, we push people to live in that state of mind. And the big paradox is, according to Buddhism, and they find this in Buddhist monks, that the desire not to desire becomes a desire. So there's almost no
Right,
escape, right?
right,
If
right, right.
you go to say, okay, I'm going to go to a Buddhist monastery. I'm a slave of my desires, and I want to not desire. But then that's just become a desire,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's a very interesting thing to think about, because I think at the root of every psychological type and every social goal and ethos and this value system we have, there usually is this sort of impetus to chase desires. I don't know if if that gets to the bottom of sort of what you're talking about here, and again, I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult thing to overcome, but I think if you can find a way to do what we're doing now, find a path in life that is truly something that resonates with you at the deepest level of your soul, not to try to sound too corny or new agey here, that may be the key to dealing with all the problems we're talking about. I don't know.
Okay. So, and this is where I go with desire. And
Yeah,
the thing is, I push that, right?
yeah, yeah.
So I
Got
push
to.
that you should desire, right?
Yeah,
Because in productivity and in achievement,
yeah,
if you're a runner, if you're an athlete, you and
yeah,
I are both athletes, right? And so we've desired to do better and
yeah,
to
yeah,
perform better
yeah,
at what we do, right?
yeah.
So
Right.
we're going to practice, we're going to rehearse, we're going to do whatever we're going to do in order to get better at what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it's the desire and it's
Mhm.
the end goal. I want to be a better
Yeah,
football player. I want to
yeah,
be I want to be a better runner. I want to be more efficient with how I expend my body in the sports analogy, but then
right.
also in the workplace. I desire, we will desire to make more money, and we know that
Sure.
that's a driving force for
Absolutely.
individuals. Sure. So then the question though is, I think, is where does that desire become
Yeah.
uh, more of a
Yeah.
problem, right?
Yeah. When
Where
you're a
does where does
slave to it.
where does where is that
Yeah.
desire so far away that we
Yeah.
don't believe we can achieve it, but we should
Yeah.
still desire it?
Yeah. Maybe that's the key. And then also there's this notion from Hindu philosophy, Vedanta Hinduism, in which, and you read this in the scriptures. It's in scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita that everybody's sure, most people have heard about in Hinduism, that they call non-attached action. And that the notion there is that you have an object of desire that you want to work toward. But again, the desire isn't driving you. You're embracing the desire. You're identifying with it, and if you don't, and your happiness isn't dependent on your attaining the object of that desire. The path is the goal. The path becomes the goal. So that Gandhi talked about this, and he used to talk about, because everybody was like, well, what if you get very, very responsibly said, what if you get killed? Said this to Martin Luther King too. What if you get killed before you achieve these goals that you want to have for world peace and human brotherhood and everything else? And both of them at different times said, well, that's my path is to be the vehicle through which maybe that goal is realized. But there's nothing else for me to do. Any other path I traveled, I'd be insincere. So just striving to achieve that end is the goal, the very path I'm using to get to it. Maybe that's kind of the key to what you're talking about. If that makes sense, is what I'm
Oh,
saying.
sure,
Yeah,
sure. And you and I, again, we teach,
yeah,
we're in the classroom, and what do we want? We want students to understand.
mhm,
And again, we've had this conversation. Is it to just stuff as much information into the mind? I'm not so sure that's what we really want to do. I think what we want to be able to do is to get individuals to think about what they're doing, and think about what their objectives are,
yeah,
in our particular discipline. And again, back to mine is, business. Although as much as it's business, it's really it's behavior, it's organizational behavior.
sure,
It's not necessarily business.
yeah,
It's in the organization, and so it can be any type of organization,
right,
for profit, nonprofit, state, whatever it might be. And so I recognize that. And then, of course, we can also take this into individuals who are, mothers who are caring for their kids,
right.
right? In the sense
That's a
of,
great analogy
uh,
and a great example.
what's my purpose? and
Yeah,
and sometimes, they're going, oh my gosh, because I've heard this from mothers say,
yeah,
I got to get back into the workplace. I need
yeah,
to talk to
yeah,
adults because all I'm doing is
sure,
talking to kids.
sure.
But I'm sure, I would have to believe that most mothers, and certainly
Yeah,
fathers, but certainly mothers, recognize that what they're doing in raising their children and spending that time, that it's that is their objective and goal, and that is a higher level of thinking outside of their own self. Now they're putting themselves into cultivating and designing a mind, their children, right?
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that they're well adjusted and able to move up.
Yeah, and maybe that also is a great example of where the path is the goal. The path becomes the very goal that the path is supposed to be leading to. Because right, the purpose of raising a kid isn't to get to their adulthood, right? The purpose of raising a child and being with a child is to enjoy life, the life path with your child, right? No matter where, in a sense, no matter where it leads, because we never know, right? Um,
Right. And
so
and and kind of going back to what you were saying, I think what happens is when we are being parents and trying to raise that kid, I think what we're doing is we're not always in the moment. I mean, okay, you are
yeah,
when the child
right,
is really, really young, but
yeah,
then as your child becomes an adolescent, and now
right,
you're starting to say, "Oh, clean your room because
right,
these are the qualities that you
yeah,
must have to be a
yeah,
good citizen,"
right,
and now all of your ideas are about tomorrow for your
yeah,
child, and
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
the child is living in today. The child is not thinking about, child, adolescent, teenager. My gosh.
Yeah,
I think I was 40 years old before I thought beyond the
yeah, yeah,
day,
yeah.
right?
50
Um,
years old is adulthood for
50.
men.
Okay, I still don't, right? I still only think, but
Yeah,
our parents are trying to prepare us for the future. And I guess that's another thing
yeah,
too, is
yeah.
we are pushing in that sense of linear living
It's a good point.
versus
Yeah.
global thought.
It's a great point, and I'm sure, and I guarantee you, again, I'm not that familiar with that literature, but I know there are a host of family psychologists who say just that, right? We have to bring, we're that increasingly in this kind of culture, parents look at parenting as a job, right? A linear sort of task needs to be fulfilled, and it has in some respects taken a toll on what at least we used to consider to be the idyllic childhood, right? There's too much helicopter parenting and making sure kids are involved in a gazillion activities and they're tightly scheduled and they never get into any trouble. They never take any risks. And again, people now our age, I mean, you listen to people tell stories. I'm on Facebook a lot and I'm communicating with old friends, and we talk about God, how different things are for kids now. How when we, playing for us was get the hell out of the house and go literally go play in the street or go out in the woods or whatever. And we did things that parents now, I'm sure it seems inconceivable. And in terms of, because everything kids do now, or not everything, but very often, right? Sort of the ideal now is have them in lots of structured, organized activities. So they're being supervised. They're not thinking for themselves too much, and they're not taking any risks. And I think that's probably a result of a lot of that mentality, like as you're sort of suggesting. And as far as parenting goes, it's funny you and I are critiquing parenting. We have had absolutely no experience
Absolutely. I
whatsoever.
know. I know. I know.
Makes
I
us
know. Here I
expert.
am. Yeah. 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 Here
But
I am
one
talking
thing
about
I
something I
thought was
don't know
very
anything
interesting
about.
in terms of empirical evidence, um, and you might be familiar with this study. I know you certainly are, and more so than me with most of these things. But they did a study to look at parental, because people talk about very often parents say, "Oh, having a kid was the best thing that ever happened to me, the happiest days of my life," and so on and so forth. And so what this study did was do random moment sampling on parents who are raising kids. And random moment sampling, for anybody who's listening to this doesn't know it, it's where you call somebody, or you contact somebody in the moment and say, right now, are you happy? Are you having a good time? That's random moment sampling. And they tell you yeah or no or something like it. And they compared that with memories that parents have after the fact of experiences with the kids at Disney World or whatever, or after they've raised kids, looking back on different events that they did. And they found that parents looking back on what they've done and their experiences with children almost uniformly were, yeah, that were wonderful. They were magical times. I'm so lucky. Why couldn't I, why can't I be there again? I miss that so much. But when they did the random moment sampling, are you happy right now? It's like, no, that kid's crying. No, I'm fighting with the kid. No, the kid just threw their cereal across the room. Oh, they just came home late and I didn't tell me where they were. And so it's interesting that you have that contrast. I don't know if the random moment sampling necessarily undermines those memories, though, because I think when you're looking at something in retrospect, it gives you a kind of wisdom that maybe you don't have in the moment. I don't know. I don't know what you think about that, but just thought that was pertinent to what you were talking about.
Well, I think that's an excellent example. And then I think
Yeah,
what happens, in bringing this into the workplace, I
yeah,
think what happens is when
yeah,
people are talking about past experiences, I think they like whether the experience was good or bad, they like to talk about the experiences. And
yeah,
I think this is kind of uh, where I kind of like to be with what we're talking about. And that is, sure, we want to be in the moment. We want to really understand, but I think that's what that's all about, because then what happens is time gets away from you, and then it's time to
yeah,
reflect back.
yeah, yeah,
And if you recognize that your experiences today are good and you're going to be able to reflect on them, then maybe your sense of awareness, understanding, sense of contentment and happiness will go along further with you than if you're focusing on. And again, when I said at the beginning of this is going to turn our brains into a pretzel,
yeah,
because it really is. I know it's going back and forth and everything else, but that's what philosophy is really all about.
yeah,
The idea is if you can be in the moment and recognize what are the good things are happening in the moment, then ultimately your life will be better, I guess. But I also recognize in life there's light bills to pay. Make sure I've got a job.
yeah,
There are things that people are going through that they're going, oh, the conversation you all are having, it sounds great, wonderful, and all that kind of stuff. But that's once I'm in a position
yeah,
that I can feel that. I'm not in a position that I can feel that. And I'd wanna try to believe and try to help that, even going through these rougher times, going through times when you don't have everything that you want, or unfortunately even almost need,
yeah,
that you can be self-reflective. And of course, it becomes harder when you don't have, and you're in a needed position, there's no doubt,
yeah.
versus one where you're in a comfortable position.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our position in life now, where we've sort of achieved a modicum of what one would want to achieve in a career, and have plenty of money, and have plenty of, and have a decent roof over our heads, and are well fed every night. I think it's probably a lot easier to have the luxury of finding peaceful moments than is for a Bangladeshi farmer's kid who's living at a subsistence level, or anything in between, including a lot of our students. But I do think there is something nonetheless to the Buddhist notion, very often Zen Buddhist notion, of somehow finding those hours on working on the McDonald's drive-through line as truly sacred moments. If you can do that, you've found the key to happiness.
Yeah, yeah, and great words there, Rich. And
Thanks, man.
there's no doubt that we want to be able to recognize that we live in a we live in our own world between our ears, right? And so, however difficult, however sometimes even painful things are going on with us, can we recognize that, hey, I'm here, I'm surviving, I'm, things will get better. And, and again, with that also is that I like the idea that I'm able to think. I like the idea that I'm able to reflect. I like the idea that, um, I've got the faculty of my mind. This has been great. I'm not so
Yeah.
sure we've ended where we thought we were going to start, but
Yeah,
as always, this is a terrific conversation, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And hopefully, we'll do something again like this with maybe
absolutely.
a different topic. But Rich, again, thank you so much. Appreciate that. And we're in our filled environment with our stuff, our
Yeah.
books and everything else that we were telling people we shouldn't have so much stuff, and here we are with our stuff. But anyway, we'll connect next time, and we'll see you soon.
Back at you, brother. Stay
Okay.
dangerous.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Con Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.